He's writes lyrics now.
Oh, really? Maybe we're not ready for it to be in progress.
Serious recording.
No.
We're on.
Square footage, saving utilities and emphasis, have an inspector. And one of the things we talked about at the end there, our policy, of course, and I've talked about this a lot. The most common lawsuit in residential real estate, buyer suing the seller after closing for misrepresentation or bill disclosed. And a big basis for that is self-disclosure. So our agent, our listing agent, has to review it for completeness. Not really making sure he's correct, but if there's anything that stands out that our agent says, we talked about this, I say, you have a very careful conversation with the seller. Not making the seller feel like I'm telling you how to fill it out. Then we're in trouble as we work through that.
So what order do you want to go in?
I'll do sales disclosure first, kind of like I've got in the packet here, and then into the buyer rep, points on the buyer rep, whatever, how we want to work through that.
Everybody have your right. View this.
Of course, you've got 2 days in a row that you've been co-instructing.
Thank you.
I won't be nearly as much fun as Marcia was.
So you just want to sit here?
See what?
You don't want to sit here with the.
Whatever you want to do. You want us over here or there?
Good.
What do you think, Angie? Is there any hope?
There is. I'm about to share the screen.
But you can protect them through it if they get that good interest rate. I don't know. That's why I told him, he goes, I don't lose my way. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I've had guys waiting for 20 years.
All right, okay, y'all are good to go.
You can tell me 20 years.
Official?
So it's,
Very official.
it just depends on their circumstances. That's what I try to dive in. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, there's a reality and then there's hitting your head against the wall. You at least tell them, we're gonna hit our head. Are you willing to do this?
Okay, we'll officially get started.
Gotta scroll.
And thank Angie very much for getting us.
And it's shared with those on Zoom.
So the Zoom
Everybody on
people
Zoom, y'all
have
can
this.
hear us, raise your hand. James, all right, good. Yeah,
We good?
Good, you're good.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So as I mentioned in my email, co-teaching here, we got Nick and I working through the process, mostly Nick, and I'm gonna sit back and try to be nice. Which I always am.
Always nice.
Till we don't listen.
Yeah, but it's in all our classes. Your comments, your questions, really important. That's how we learn from each other as we go through it. Especially Nick, ask him a lot of tough questions, because
Bring it.
right on.
Ooh,
Through that, so
okay.
we can deal with it.
I'll tell you it'll be the right answer, but I'll give you an answer.
Well,
That's all we can ask.
that Denton keeps talking about, he just makes it up anyway, so that's okay. But we're going to start off in talking about the two sellers disclosure notices. You've got a little handout in your packet there that talks about those. Our policy for our listings is to use the Texas Realtor 6-page seller disclosure. Your packet's in the back there, young lady. And we talk a little bit about the why of that. We don't just have arbitrary, say, oh, we like that, it's the one you have to use. There's a reason for it. And we'll look at it, and we'll look at the differences between the two. And you've got the Texas Realtors one there, and you've got the Trek one also, which is a 4-page. And you see how many things that are addressed in the Texas Realtor ones that are not addressed in the Trek one. And our feeling is our seller, it's better for our seller to disclose more than the minimum required by law. And so Nick's going to start off and talk about the self-disclosure and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Please ask tough questions.
Well, real quick show of hands, who has seen the other one, the normal one versus the TAR? Already seen both versions of this? Have they been exposed to both? Do you have some familiarity with what's missing on the second one? Have you ever had to use one in a transaction? Either you had the buyer and the lister, the selling agent, listing agent said, seller wants to use this one, and it's not the one that we normally use. Have y'all ever run into that? No, you have? What's been your experience with that?
I mean, it kind of is what it is.
Did you have the buyer?
if I have the buyer, like Abby uses a different one. Is that what you're
They
talking about?
got their own, every has their own.
Yeah, but from our standpoint, we're just looking at these two and.
I've seen this, yes.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things where you're gonna have to walk your buyer through what's not on that one. If it's a situation, especially in multiple offer, you don't wanna press too hard, you don't wanna maybe be seen as confrontational with the listing agent, and they've only done the second one, which is not as in-depth. You have to kind of guide your buyer through what questions we might ask ahead of time or during the due diligence if you still want to get involved in this transaction. So from a today in the market real life perspective, you may see that, but it's important for us to be able to coach our client through that and what would be required in that instance. First of all, if you guys have your packet there in front of you, on page 2, so the format of the two are very different. One is just easier to read, in my opinion. Sorry, let me back up a second. So the one that we do recommend, like Bob said, has anybody here used Seller Shield with their sellers?
Yeah.
Not yet? Who has? Okay, just 2 of you?
Ought to be part of your listing packet. Should be there.
So I would recommend doing it. There are limitations to it. It's not, we've gone through it as a client, and there are clunky parts to it that you might have to warn them about. The very beginning, you have to tell them which form to use or which form you recommend them using. Use either, but then you go through the steps there. But I would highly recommend using Seller Shield in your listings due to what Bob has mentioned before, being the added, insulation against future issues. So this isn't you telling them how to fill it out, it's somebody else who's filling it out, and it gives them the optional coverage of having, how does it work as far as the coverage goes?
Like a what? 2 years.
So up to 2 years.
And there's a dollar amount, so many hours of attorney's fees as it work through it. And it's better than now. It's kind of like insurance for a seller. And we have but our sellers don't have. And you're the ones most likely to be sued in the situation, along with us.
So if they go through this process and they use Seller Shield to fill out the seller's disclosure, then they are eligible to have this insurance if they pay for it, and they can pay for it at closing, which covers them for 2 years for any kind of non-disclosure issue or some kind of buyer complaint that comes up as a result of you didn't disclose this or you disclosed this improperly. So I'd highly recommend you guys doing it. Once you get it down a couple of times, it's very easy to explain. So, but go through it as a client, go through it. If you're walking through it with somebody, then you can see it from the front face as well.
Are your clients choosing it?
Mhm. Yeah. Now, not all of them are choosing the insurance. I laid that out in front of them, but we are asking them to use this to fill out their form, which also helps us.
Yeah.
From a liability standpoint.
So they pay for it or we pay for it?
To fill out,
To,
it's free.
Okay.
Well, that's that's an association with the office.
Yeah.
So to fill it out and the guidance to fill it out that they have there, the little tutorials and everything else, completely free. They then have the opportunity to pay for, out of proceeds at closing, the insurance. So that's the distinction between the two. But the fact that you've offered it to them and exposed them to this product is a really good thing for you and a really good thing for the office and a really good thing for them.
Because there is a form, you give them what they choose to do it or not do it. And you want to keep that in your file. So a year later, when they get sued and say, hey, didn't you have, well, no, what about that? I never heard about that. Well, yeah, you did. Here's the form. So it's a good thing to make sure that we have the documentation that has been offered to them. And they chose to use it or not. Whichever.
Now,
do we just go to sellershield.com or is it through command?
Well, Seller Shield has all of our agents' names. And so as you can go through it and get the information, so you'll be able to do that.
Great.
If any questions on it, Lori or Angie.
you'll set up an account with them and then you'll have something that you can then email out.
Thank you.
But the difference is between the two, as we're going through it, and if you look at your form here, your packet, I don't think I have, read this page 1.
Yeah.
Section 1 is not in there.
Okay.
But the main thing about section 1, if you'll notice there, that it's just, like I said, it's a little bit easier to see.
Section 1's not in there?
No.
Not the first page. So thank you. I think you got hung up in the copy there, but
Good.
So the TXR form lists the items which may be leased or owned and has a place for that disclosure. So on the front of it, if y'all are familiar, you've got how long has it been in the, how long have they been in the property or not in the property, whatever, that's at the top, if they're occupying or not. The next section, section 1, the way I always explain this to sellers is yes, no, and unknown. Unknown's a perfectly good answer. So if you don't know if you have something, that's fine. And we shouldn't represent to our buyers that if they see something on here, that it specifically conveys with the property. So just because something's on here and listed, you need to make sure you check exclusions in the contract itself to see what conveys and what doesn't. We have least opportunities on here with security systems, which luckily now in the contract, there's a form for. So your smart homes, your thermostats, any kind of leased equipment can now be governed by a separate form, and that can be decided with the contract. So the TAR one does not have that on there, as far as I know, correct? There's nothing about the lease on that.
The track one doesn't.
Sorry, the track.
Yeah, the track one doesn't, you're right.
So having that in the disclosure ahead of time, obviously would be a much better thing to have. So if you've got the buyer on that and you don't know what conveys and what doesn't, the conversation with the listing agent is a great thing to have, but also if they have this disclosure, then there should be something on there specifically about whether something's owned or leased.
Most of what you'll see that's in the tech realtor form, it's not in the tracker, things that if you thought about it, from a buyer's perspective, buyers want to know these things. Buyers want to know, and anything that helps the buyer through the situation helps our seller. Just a good thing.
One thing on here, and Bob, I wanted to clarify this with you. I know that we say that things don't convey, but a garage door opener, when it says how many units do you have, that's how many of these things. How many remotes do you have? That's the clickers, right? Those, it's my understanding, are an accessory to something that's an attachment. Could be seen that way, could not. So by filling out here that there are 2 remotes, your seller could be perceived by the other side as those will be conveyed with the house at closing. May or may not, you want clarification on that. That's when in doubt, clarify whether or not those convey. Most people open their garage door openers now with their visor or their mirror in their car anyway. That being said, some of them are older and they only work with the remotes. So you don't want to be buying universal remotes at the last second if that's a confusing issue and they say, where are they? They're supposed to be here. So just, it's another little.
Yeah, because buyers look on that and they see that number and they say, oh, that's how many we get. Well, maybe not.
So don't say you have them if you don't have them, because otherwise your seller may be going out, or you may be going out and buying universal remotes after that.
It's going to be you.
Yeah.
Seller's not going to do it.
Yeah. Moving on to the section 4. That is the section where we talk about, are you aware of any other item, equipment, systems in place? That's where we are. So in section 3 of the check form, has additional items such as disease trees, encroachments, historic districts, and formatting of other items that make it more user-friendly to make disclosures. So if you're with a seller and you think that those might be part of the transaction, this is another reason to use this form as opposed to the check one, because there's obvious reasons why a buyer would want to know that. And that if you used a different form and you got through into the contract phase of things and the buyer finds out later that they're running up against those issues, they could come back to you and say, well, you should have told me about this. So let's use the correct form and use the one that we recommend. So any questions on that or anything else? Do you guys have trouble getting your clients to use the TAR form when you make recommendations to your sellers?
This form here?
Yeah. Okay, I don't think so either. My opinion is it's an easy thing to explain that this is the minimum, but we recommend this because it's much more useful and more people are asking for it and used to seeing it. And to be honest, in the industry, it looks like you're hiding something when you use the other one. Oh, they're just going to do the bare minimum. Well, then I'm going to start to ask you all of these questions in here that are in addition to what's on the minimum form. So when you start to explain it that way, a lot of the times the sellers just say, okay, well, yeah, let's do that because it's going to cause fewer problems in the future as you move forward.
And
So
the other thing I like to convey is that if there's something on the fence, you're better, safer to disclose everything, because then it's out there and you're not leaving yourself liable.
when in doubt, disclose. Yes,
What if something has been fixed?
only if it's a previous issue, or you think that it might become an issue later on when they find out that it's not original. If it's being portrayed as original on any literature or anything like that, that could be a problem if it's been addressed or been fixed or been touched. But only, does everybody know all the previous ones? Let's jump to that. On your seller's disclosure, if you go to. All right. Page 2, 3, section 3 down at the bottom. I did a little off topic, but this is important stuff. And I think it's more important than actually using one or the other, because I think we're on the same page. So if you go down there and you say, okay, well, there's been, I don't know. This is always the one that I love to use. If you've ever cooked meth on the property, but you're not doing it currently, Mr. Seller, you need to disclose that, even if you're not still doing it. It's a fun one, loosens them up a little bit, but any of the others, as I'm coaching them through this a little bit, I'm not supposed to tell them what to fill out, but we can give them some guidance. If they see the word previous, then we have to note that it has been previous issue with the property. So previous roof repairs. If the roof is functioning right now and it's been replaced recently, that's fine. There's other things that address the roof, but I'm using this as an example. But the fact that it says previous roof repairs, just because it's working now, we do have to disclose that there was a previous fix to it or previous repair or replacement. Does that all make sense?
And for previous, then, when it's something that was done before they purchased the home, they can still make the notation.
It's the seller's knowledge. It's not what they did. It's the seller's disclosure of what they know. If they don't know it, they don't know it. Unknown's a perfectly good answer on a lot of this stuff.
Okay, but my question is, are you aware of previous conditions? And they know that there were previous structural repairs
Sure.
because of their seller's disclosure when they purchased it. So they would say yes, but make a notation that it was done by the previous owner and they're not.
Yes, you're always, if you read it, the next page where it says if the answer to any items is yes, explain. So you're supposed to explain on all of these, even if it's something simple like WDI or roof or whatever. You're supposed to say roof replaced per previous owner in 2008.
Right.
So it's kind of like us. We don't ever want to be the source of the information. We want to be the conduit to the source. So you can tell your sellers in that regard the same thing. So, hey, Mr. Seller, you didn't do this, but you know that it was done before you, or you think that it was per information you've been given. So cite where you got that information. Per previous seller's disclosure from previous owner, roof replaced 2008. It's kind of all you can do.
Exactly.
But you know, if they know about it, it's best to say that than to not say it because, well, I don't know for sure that it was done. I didn't do it. No, you need to go ahead and put that out there, especially on the ones that say previous. So that all make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for questions. We'll go through this a little bit more here. So just kind of scrolling through some of the questions that Bob has or the things to point out. In, like we said, in section 4, the formatting and being able to say more stuff. Section 8, the unresolved permits question, more extensive HOA information, the death question, which the other form, the minimum form does not cover at all. And propane distribution system question. So some of these are more common than others, obviously. But if you have, and does everybody know might have Bob speak to this more when he gets back in. Does everybody know our broker's recommendation when it comes to deaths on the property?
Disclose.
And can we take a listing if they're not going to disclose it?
If we're aware of it,
If they're aware of it and they tell us,
then we're aware of it.
then we're aware
We
of
have
it.
to disclose it.
If they say they don't want to disclose it because they don't have to disclose it, because technically they may not have to if it fits a certain category, we don't want you to take that listing. And you need to have a conversation with Bob about that. Because if it comes out later that the neighbor comes over and goes, we're so happy that you've moved into this house and brought all this new love and joy. And it's just such a tragedy what happened there before you got here. Because they will.
Yeah.
That's when a problem comes up.
So you're not talking natural deaths, obviously. You're talking about just murders and suicides, correct?
No, I was.
Natural deaths now?
We're recommending,
Well, we had an instance like that come up a couple of years ago now, but the son was handling the gentleman's estate and he had passed away in the house and he lived alone and they didn't find him for a couple weeks. And so as a result, the insurance company, they had filed a claim to get the house back to where it could be because of everything you can imagine. So he wanted to disclose it, even though it was a natural cause. It wasn't anything foul play, but because the neighbors knew about it. They could just walk right over and say, well, did you know that?
Absolutely.
so our brokerage policy, and we're going to double check with Bob when he gets back in here because he's the final authority on it. But it's my understanding that our brokerage policy is we highly recommend to all our sellers that they disclose any death on the property. However, If they decide not to, that's a conversation with whether or not we can actually take the listing. Okay?
And in that case, we knew it was gonna come up because of insurance claim. It
Oh,
was gonna
yeah.
come up on
In
a
that-
report anyway.
In that case, you know it's gonna come, but you can assume it's gonna come up anyway because neighbors talk.
Yeah.
And if they just want to Google their address, they can probably find it out anyway.
But if legally you don't have to disclose
Yeah,
it,
that's a
can you,
But you,
can you get in trouble? Like, yes, you should have, and the neighbor could bring it up, but can the new owners then come back to you legally and do something?
Bob's back.
Bob loves my question.
we're on the death in the house question.
Yeah.
What our office policy is, what's legally required and
Okay.
how we should handle that.
So this has evolved over a lot of years. You know, we went from not gonna touch it, not gonna deal with it, none at all, kind of thing. Where we say, well, let's look at what's going on. The death question, there are 3 deaths that the law exempts the seller from disclosing and the agent from disclosing. Accident not related to this property, suicide, or natural. The law says not required to disclose those. That doesn't mean the seller doesn't have liability, especially in suicide. Sellers have been sued for failing to disclose suicide, even though the law doesn't require that disclosure. A lack of requirement is not a lack of liability. So our position has always been, we look at when it happened, we look at what it was. Now, if it's violent death, no question, disclosure going to happen, violent deaths. And frankly, sometimes suicide is a very violent, death, you never know. But we look at when it happened, what the circumstances were, and we explain to the seller, here's your risk, and then the seller decides how much risk to take. And then based on that, we decide how much risk to take. And frankly, unless it's a very notorious kind of thing that's happened, a famous person who just committed suicide and everybody in the world knows about it, everybody in the neighborhood is talking about it. If our seller is willing to accept the risk, we'll accept the risk.
Okay.
If you made a good judgment call, this is a good listing that you want to do as you work through that process. Follow up, yes, ma'am.
So is there like something that we could get the sellers to sign that
Oh, well,
says that you brought it up? and-
Email is sufficient. Email.
Okay.
What you do is you send them an email, say, here your risk, here's the situation. You need to make a decision and we need an email back from them on their decision.
What do lawsuits look like for that when a buyer's a new?
Without, and this is being recorded, but I will say to you, in most of the cases I'm aware of, I actually didn't have one in Texas, there were several other states. They always involve cultural issues. There are certain cultures that no pun intended, but that kind of death on the property is death on view. I mean, so you know what, no way we did have one here, it wasn't a suicide. And the person died of natural causes in the hospital, not even in the house. When the buyers found out about it, said, no, we're sorry, we can't be part of that transaction. There was a death associated with it. And it was crazy. It was an estate sale. We knew there'd been a death. So we got an estate sale, somebody died. What are you looking at the house for? But different people have different senses of things. And so that's why you make the judgment call. The reality is the chances of the seller being sued, even for a suicide in Texas, are incredibly remote. But they need to know there's the risk and you can make the decision.
So is our recommendation then on a regular basis without maybe everything else, disclose still?
We do like to disclose, but if we've got a seller who's willing to take the risk and the seller says, we're not going to talk about, we're not going to disclose it, we're not going to deal with it. If you take the listing, you accept that because you're not going to disclose it because then the seller could come after us.
So come back and talk to Bob when you encounter one of the.
All right, hotline, call the hotline. They'll handle it for you.
Hotline number right there, put it in your phones.
On your scenario, was that buyer able to keep or did the seller get to keep their earnest money? Because the buyer pulling out just because they don't like it is still not technically.
They had other rights of termination.
Okay, so they used a different one. Okay.
Hey, Bob,
Yes, sir.
years ago, I remember we had a buyer that was buying a house where the seller had committed suicide.
Yeah.
In the house. Is the email okay with that in discussions with the buyer or?
Email is a good documentation. Even courts like emails because it's timestamped and it's got, sequences in there. If you've got good acknowledgement and documentation on that, that's fine. We're good. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on past that one, if there's no more questions on it. Section 10, As the inspection question, which truck does not, so does everybody see where that is? Section 10. So this is the one where if they've had a report, written report given to them in the last 4 years, you need to disclose it. They may not be able to put their hands on it. And in those cases,
In many cases, they don't.
and
Had it done 3 years ago, they have no idea where it is.
yeah, and so you still may say, have it, but, or we were given it, maybe we cannot locate it or something like that. Again, a lot of this has to do with communication.
And good agents on the other side know that happens because it's happened to them.
Yep.
You know, you're not fudging with them, but yeah, this happens.
Section 11, the tax exemption. Why do you think this would be important to have on a seller's disclosure?
It's gonna affect the estimate.
Yep, your prorated taxes, right? You know, could come up. We don't want it to be a surprise later. So you say, hey, this is what we have in place right now. It's going to roll off at the end of the year. You're going to need to put a new one in place. At least they'll know. And with a good agent on the other side, they're going to have that information, not have to ask you about it or rely on what's on the tax record for that.
There's only one surprise we want at closing. We get paid more than we thought we were gonna get paid.
Yes.
We're good with
And even that makes me nervous.
that.
Hand it to me.
Like, I'm not nervous.
I'm good to go with it.
Brandon's got it covered.
Section 12, insurance claim question, truck form does not have that. So, you know, should you be on your buyer side of things? Should you be asking about clue reports and any other things like that? Absolutely, you should. If you're doing always have time, you need to at least make them aware that those are available. If they have an insurance agent, they can ask for that. So that's another reason why this form would be a whole lot better to have. They disclose, gosh, there's a water claim here like 2 years ago. You get to start asking more questions about it. Pierce.
Back to 11,
Yeah.
you said it was a foreign investor, but you need to put that on there. We get flipped at closing for taxes on.
That's not part of section 11.
It's nowhere, it's not there, and it's nowhere in the sales disclosure.
Yeah. So, I mean,
The title company, when you get a contract, your title company and their questionnaire that you send out to the seller will have that information in there. We just had one, I like to see my agent here, where our agent has the buyer, and the buyer was concerned about the potential tax implications at closing. And they didn't know the seller, where the seller is a foreign person, probably was vacant. The seller should have moved back home to Sweden. So I think, well, maybe there's a situation there. So we encourage the agent to reach out to the title company and find out. And then once you're in a contract, it's okay for the buyer's agent, an instruction of the buyer, to ask the listing agent, is your client a foreign seller, foreign investor, foreign person? It's okay to ask that. Yes, no discrimination there. Your buyer says, yeah, I want to make sure I don't end up with a surprise at closing. And that opens up the conversation. Okay, so they've resolved the issue and they know that we're good. In this particular situation, it doesn't appear like there's any capital gains at all. They own the property for less than 2 years. They bought it for like $280 and they're selling it for like $290 or something like that. So, and the buyers are buying it for personal residence, so that creates an exemption there. So. But you know, the actually realtors is looking a little bit at whether or not this might be included as one of the sections in their disclosure notice about the own foreign person, because they made the change in their listing agreement. It's there, but so far it's nowhere in there. And their basic thought is it doesn't really involve anything with the property. And self-disclosure notice deals with the property. So.
Well. Does everybody know why that's important? Why that question's been asked? Anybody who's newer, understand chapter or paragraph 20 of the contract? Where that federal tax requirements holding money back to the buyer, hold money back in case it's a foreign person. Okay. All right, we won't dwell on that then. Yeah, I don't know why. I suppose you could put that on the disclosure in 11 there, but I don't.
Probably not. And certainly. The challenge with disclosing foreign person upfront is you may run off buyers. So the seller needs to really give you permission to disclose that. You would never put an MLS on prior to market seller as a foreign person without the seller being on board with that. Because there'll be a whole lot of buyers, say, whoa, I've heard about this, man, don't show me that house. Now, in this seller's market, it's probably less of a problem than it would have been normally, but you certainly have to have a seller's permission to do it because it could impact on the property.
And then the Trek form, the minimum one also does not have the additional question about the insurance claim where it's, the funds have not been used to fix the property. So that's a very, very important one. I actually had a situation like that where I had a seller who did not disclose that, answered, filled out everything incorrectly on the seller's disclosure that no, yes, the funds have been used, whatever. And we got to the point of inspections, got under contract. Inspector says, need to have this roof looked at. Look over at the seller, said, I think said the roof was replaced. Yeah, we made a claim, but the roofer got up there and said it really didn't need it, so we didn't do it.
Oh,
But he took the money,
Well, sir,
didn't he?
that's insurance fraud.
yes.
So we backed out of that contract. He refunded the buyer. Luckily, the buyer was kind enough just to receive the money from that. This is a while ago, not a competitive market. So reimbursed him for the expenses of the inspection, the option fee, and everybody split up and went on their merry way. And that person still owns the house. So, as far as I know,
Serves him right.
he
Yeah.
still has the roof on there. Whatever.
We had a deal come up in the colony for some buyer clients, first time buyers. And the house had all kinds of foundational issues that were apparent when you walked through. It was just sloping down really bad. So we had an inspector come out and the inspector was like, you know, you need to get a structural engineer out there. In the meantime, I'm talking to neighbors in the neighborhood going, are you familiar with this house? What's the deal? Come to find out, simultaneously, I find out from a neighbor and the clue report comes back that the home had been sold at salvage because it had been moved completely on its foundation in a tornado. There was no mention on the seller's disclosure. The home
What
was
section
owned.
do we have?
I don't have a tornado section.
Tornado section?
The home was owned by the listing agent and her sister.
Wow,
They bought it at auction to flip,
Yeah.
and there was nothing
wow.
disclosed.
Well, I see the Dorothy clause here would cover that.
Yes, yes, yeah.
I love that. That's right.
Let me ask you something. If somebody does do that, okay, so
Let's do what?
I'm sorry, back up to the first one. They got an insurance claim on roofs. I know there was some in East Plano. Everybody did roofs and the roofers were like, you don't need it. Say that person did that. If they disclose that yes, there was a claim, yes, they received money because they automatically sent it. The insurance was doing that then a few years ago. Anyway, if they say that they did that, but roofer didn't put it on there, if they were just basically disclose it, are they okay? Or is that still fraud no matter what?
That's a legal question when you talk to an attorney. But I'm serious, but at least the seller disclosed it.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
That's gonna help there. And then the big challenge is the buyer needs to talk to their insurance company, say, how's this gonna affect my coverage? Say, well, you won't have any, won't have a roof coverage. Because there's been a claim and the insurance company has paid for a new roof and there's not a new roof on it.
Hey, Brandon,
Maybe.
it probably makes a big difference if there's a mortgage on the house.
That's true too.
Because if there's the mortgage
But
company,
insurance,
the mortgage company would be the most upset.
But maybe your buyer is getting such a fantastic deal on this house that they go, you know what? I know I don't have any coverage on this roof. Next time there's a hailstorm, or I've gotten such a fantastic deal, I don't mind replacing this roof at my own expense. I know there's no coverage, then maybe.
Yeah.
But how rare is
A lot
that?
of variables there.
well, in investments, it can happen, but disclosing, that's what I'm hoping. Okay.
Disclose is a big deal.
Yeah, disclose.
Doesn't make you scot-free from everybody else like the lenders and insurance companies,
Yeah,
but
but we don't deal with the insurance company.
No, we
It's
don't.
not us, and we're not attorneys, so we can't.
And buyers initialing that they've read that page. Okay.
you're good.
I think, is that it on? No. Okay, so in addition to this page, I don't think that one got it here either.
Oh, we don't have that page, huh?
So please,
You guys are doing
Please
a
look at the
better
monitor.
job of receiving your stuff.
We got 4 books over here in the wrong.
so on this paragraph, there's at the, let's see, page 6 at the bottom. Item 7, right below where nobody puts the names and numbers for utilities.
Right?
You are highly encouraged to have the inspection So there's that, but all the ones above that as well. This form does a better job of putting all those advisory notices that, again, people don't read, but we need to let people know that they're there. And those resources for, gosh, the
Sex offender for the website for.
the military installation one, I don't think that's on the.
Well, the military one is.
Is
on the
oh,
track.
okay.
Yeah,
But
you know, just have better detail as it explains all those things. Big thing is square footage disclaimer. Have on there. And let people know that there's an important statement at the end where it talks about if you do the inspection, which you just talked about. That we believe the information the seller has completed is correct. We have no reason to think it's inaccurate. And we rely on that information, and we're allowed to rely on that information. So when somebody says, well, wait a minute, he did this, so that's on you. No, it's not on me. We saw it, we read it, we trusted the seller to do it right, and we have nothing to do with the seller completing this form. And we have to make sure everybody's on board with, we didn't do it. We didn't do the form, we didn't help with the form. We say, oh, you need to check this box and check this. I just, and yet, we understand that. And one of our little agents, and she just was being helpful, and she had a little old lady who really had trouble writing, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll read the question, give me the answer, and I'll check it already. Of course, what happened was she misunderstood the answer or just checked the wrong box. And it was the problem. And when it finally came out that our agent's the one who actually checked on the boxes, did all the boxes, you know, fortunately, we avoided a lawsuit, but we still had to pay. Can't do that. Can't be involved on any level with the completion of that form.
And while you were out, I did kind of canvass the room, and most everybody's having very good success recommending the form that we recommend. And the
Good.
seller's actually using it. So
Good.
doesn't seem like that seems to be a problem, and getting the distinction between the two probably more so comes up when you've got the buyer and the seller on the other side, only does the minimum.
Yeah, I agree. Sounds good to me.
So do we actually do it? Or have we been supposed to be offering both sellers disclosures? Because I just prepare a packet with this disclosure.
I think that's for the most part what we do. The only circumstance under which you're going to show them both is if you're able to really eloquently explain the difference. And you're really familiar with both forms, you say, here's why we recommend this form. And you have to be very strong and say, well, recommend is probably a soft word. We require it.
Yeah, that's,
Now,
I just never
we
offered
will
the
deal
other
with
one.
this. Here's a real world. Great listing, great piece of property. You want to take the listing. The seller appears to be knowledgeable, or the seller is operating under advice of counsel, or it's an estate situation and the guy truly has never, ever seen the property. Wasn't even sure where it was, kind of thing. Under those circumstances, we're probably going to go with the 3-page or the 4-page track form. But we want a follow-up email saying, here's why this other one is better than this one. And here's why you have a risk doing this, but it's your decision. But you talk to me or Jill or Mike or management, you had a conversation to take an exception. But I wouldn't automatically bring it up unless you just feel really, really great about saying, because what'll happen is that, oh, well, I didn't realize it. Now, you do need to understand the concept. Under the law, the track form is all the seller has to do. That is all the seller is required to do is what's in the 4-page track form. So if they ever come push to shove, and if you've got a really anal seller, attorney seller, who's really already pushed the button, says, you know, I'm going to do what I have to do, but well, then you better be prepared to deal with him on that track form.
And that ends up being a business decision, whether or not you want to work with that person too, because they might be revealing who they are and how they're going to operate during the whole transaction. So just
What else are you hiding?
exactly.
Exactly.
All right, if everybody's good with that, ready for the buyer rep?
Sure. Any questions on the buyer rep?
No, good. All right, moving on. That was easy.
So we've got some key points in the buyer rep that we really want to touch on. Okay, yeah, everybody have the buyer rep there? You got it?
Yes.
We understand that you'll make a judgment call with each buyer on when you do this, when you do the buyer rep. And I know, like Jessica and her team, and I know Kim Davis' team, they've got policies, they've got things, scripts and things that we work through the process. The concept is maybe you want to have a good sense of the kind of buyer this person is before you take them on as a client. Because once you get them on that buyer rep agreement, not only do you have them as a client and they have obligations, so do you. And you want to make sure that you're really on board with that buyer and you do it. Now, having said that, you need to be familiar with the whole form, but there's some key points that you deal with. The first one is dealing with paragraph 1, which are parties. You want to make sure there's a correlation between who you have in paragraph 1 and who's going to be on the contract. We're going through one right now with our agent who has the buyer, $1.7 million cash transaction. And the buyer, who's the person on our buyer rep, who's the person on the contract, doesn't have any money. It's not her boyfriend. 1.7 million cash. And so in that situation, we've got to buy a rep, but I don't think we've got any enforceability at all against her. But in our conversation, and we did have a conversation with him, we would make no inroads with him at all. I mean, the guy's in a good, you gonna mess with me? 1.7 million cash for a house for my girlfriend? And you think you're gonna come after me? No. We take our chances on deals like that. Say, this is a good deal. It was a quick closing and hopefully it will close this week and get that deal done. But in that particular case, our agent knew up front that who I have on the buyer rep and who I have in the contract is not any enforceability. I mean, we just accept that risk up front and we hope it works out. Most of the time you'll want to do it because sometimes you have other people that are involved. Maybe got an estate, maybe got an LLC, maybe got a trust, all kinds of different things. And you want to make sure that whoever we have in this buyer rep agreement, that we want to be able to enforce that agreement against, is the person who's our client, who's going to really be on the contract, who's going to really be the one buying the property. So some correlation there. Make sure you've got their names. In paragraph 1, when you put our name, you put the brokerage name, also put your name off to the side so we know who the agent is on this, even though this is at the broker level. So we know, because sometimes things happen and we get the buyer rep and trying to look through and figure out who the heck this is. And the only thing we've got, on the 6th page or 5th page is signature in a way that you can't read it. So in one case we didn't even know who the agent was. And the agent had moved on and we said, and we could hardly figure out who the client was. So make sure it's something that's legible and figure out who in the heck and whatever's going on. Yes.
If I can interject one thing on the,
Sure.
on the client part of it. It's happened before where we've been helping first-time home buyers or younger home buyers perhaps, that later on someone else ends up being on the transaction as well or just taking over the transaction. Make sure you then replace this document with one that is with the appropriate people. Because we had it come down to the last minute and realized we didn't have the right form because mom and dad decided, no, we're going to go ahead and buy this 2-acre lot for you as opposed to you guys having to buy this now. Y'all sell your home here soon before you build. And when you do that, you can pay us back, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we changed the name of the contract, of course, but we forgot to do the buyer rep until the last minute. So just be aware of that. Those are fluid sometimes through the middle of the transaction, try to keep up with it so it doesn't bite you at the end.
Last month I had to update my buyer rep because I've been trying to find a home for this young couple since August. And I realized the buyer rep was expired. Well, let's keep
That's
adding
an easy
on.
amendment. There's.
Yes, I did that.
Yes, ma'am.
So what if you have the buyer rep in the correct name, but on the contract, when they wrote it in special provisions, the attorney gave language for that the buyer has the right to form an LLC before the.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Now, paragraphs 2 and 6. 2 deals with appointments where you're being appointed and it's an exclusive relationship. And in 6, we have the obligation of the buyer. We need to not just slip right past that. We continue to have challenges with buyers who go around us and go to builders or go to FISBOs or go to whatever. And I said, well, I didn't realize, I didn't know, I said, well, it's a good relationship. He said right here, you really need to make sure they understand that's the relationship. That you've got absolute clear obligation to them, but they've got an obligation to you. When they meet somebody at the soccer game, say, oh, you live in a house, look, hey, we got a house, we're selling it ourselves. We don't have an agent. We're selling, you ought to come over and look at it. Not a problem. Let me get in touch with my agent and make those arrangements. Because I have an agent representing me. That needs to be their immediate response, not to start negotiating around you. I mean, they really need to have a sense of that's how that works. Otherwise, and it's clashed to the point where when they say that, I just roll my eyes. Buyer rep, I don't remember signing nothing. When did I sign something? You got that? Well, yeah, actually, we do. It's right here. So, because they do, they forget. And sometimes, especially when you student DocuSign, you're all the docs with that, not paying attention. They're just signing because they want to go buy a house. And they're not really paying attention to what they do with you.
Does anybody?
You got a good script to deal with that.
That's what I was going to ask you is if anybody who's gone through this enough or maybe been burned and has learned how to coach their clients into what to say in those scenarios. Anybody have a good script for that?
Well, when we used to meet people in person for buyer reps, I would give them a handful of my cards, and if that's a double, hey, if you run into somebody, another agent, or you go to an open house, give them my card. You don't even have to sign it, just give them my card.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
And on top of that, I mean, sure, we'll get to that a little bit more later, but whenever I've gone through this in person, when we used to do things in person.
And will again soon.
Will, hopefully very soon. So the FSBO conversation, the new home construction conversation, your buddy down the street conversation, like Bob just mentioned, it's an excellent time to go in there and remind them that when that happens, make sure you don't put yourself at a disservice by not using me, calling me. Make sure that I'm involved from the very first step so that we can make sure you get the best deal possible.
Yes.
So that's a good, easy way. That's why it's a benefit to them. It's not like, hey, make sure you tell them that you're working with me because I want my commission out of this. It's not about you. It's about them and it's about helping them.
Protecting their interests.
Exactly.
Back to the party. So if we have an agent that regularly works with an investor and he always purchases through his LLC. So does his buyer's rep need to be amended to show his LLC's name or?
I'd like to see an LLC in both ways. If he's going to have that in the contract, but beside the LLC, we want his name. I want his name printed.
Okay.
So we know who the heck he is.
Do they create a new LLC for everyone they purchase?
No.
Oh, so it's one LLC.
Yes, and
Okay.
He puts all of it at once.
he does like one a month, honestly, so.
So would the client then on the buyer rep agreement show both the individual's name and the LLC?
Yeah, if they're using LLC, I'm sure.
We're a trust.
Mhm.
But I'm not as concerned with the LLC name as I am with the individual.
Okay.
Because that's who we would enforce against.
Right.
Yeah, I've mentioned several times enforcing, you got to know the real world. We have never actually filed suit relating to a buyer rep agreement. We've never done it. Though we've had cases in which we really would like to have, the courts are not on board even this late in the game with buyer reps. It's hard to enforce it in court. What we have done, and we've been successful with this, is we've sent out an invoice or a settlement request, something like that, and we get paid something. We work out some kind of a compromise. It's harder on the buyer side because too easy for the buyer not to have money. Now, this guy I was just talking about, 1.7 million cash deal, that's somebody you've got the money and maybe you can afford to pay this kind of thing. We just went through one of the deals with one of our other teams that the buyer earned in payable in the buyer rep agreement. Buyer breached the contract they were in and noticed the money. And we sent them the notice, whatever. And this was a really good buyer who loved our people that they were working with and said, okay, fine. Yeah, what do we owe you? We'll pay you. And they did, and now they wanted us to send them a nice demand notice with a mutual release liability, which we did. But those are good people. And they said, yeah, we'll pay you. That way we didn't have to try to send a demand notice or threaten a suit like that. So if you got good people there and they have the money, and those are the people who are willing to pay, by the way, if they have money. Okay, yeah, $11,000. Okay, fine, no problem. Here you are. Take it. But that's why you want to deal with people that you feel after good people and they're capable of taking care of it.
And you
My
have the
reps are
conversation,
hard to enforce.
and you have the conversation up front. So if it's unlikely that we're going to be able to go after them and get money for you in the long run, or you may not want to because of the relationship with them, make sure that you have that conversation up front. So front end load your relationships.
Yeah, good idea. Now, paragraph 3, market area. So some things that have been going on here with Trek in the last 2 years. Trek is really pushing the geographic competency. You know what that means?
Yes.
So now that we know what that means, I don't have to explain it. When you put a market area in there, you better be able to provide service for that entire market area. You better be geographically competent. That means more than you can pull it up in MLS. Because as Jessica knows, one of the areas that's in our NETRIS, our regional MLS, is Abilene.
I'm competent.
You are competent. But most people in this room are not competent to go out and list or show properties in Abilene. So
I'm not taking a
we can
list.
refer it off to you or maybe Tanya or somebody like that and take care of it. But, so you need to make sure. And our challenge with the whole geographic competency thing, it's a work in progress. Trek approved it. I was on the Trek broker responsible working group that made the recommendation to Trek for this. When we did, we understood it's going to be difficult. It's hard to define. It's hard to determine because it all comes down to what a buyer or seller feels like their agent should know about that area to represent them. And there's a range of what they think. One person may say, oh, yeah, I want to make sure they're from the area, live there their whole life or something. Somebody else said, well, as long as they got good data on it. So it'll be a total huge range of what it is. So it's hard. We're going through one right now that we're having challenges in out of the Rockwall office where the buyer said, you know what, I need somebody in this town. It's Canton actually. I need somebody in that town who knows that market, knows that town. And while our agent was from the area, she wasn't from that town and lost the deal because that particular agent, that particular buyer said, I've got to have that kind of competency. So in a case like that, you're not going to push because you don't have it. Because if something happened and ended up with Trek says, you know what, you weren't geographically competent, so you shouldn't have done that. So when you put a market area in paragraph 3, make it sure it's an area that you're comfortable with. Don't ever put Texas. We've had agents say, well, I'm licensed for the whole state. Well, you're going to show that $150,000 buyer the whole state. That's good.
Do you want me to go over this? I have to leave in 15 minutes on this.
Okay, yeah,
We skip to paragraph 11.
okay. So she's got an interesting thing. It's in paragraph 11, deal with commissions. In which she makes sure the buyer understands that she's a money grubber and she just wants the money. So talk to them about what you have there.
Okay, well, in our buyer rep agreements, we probably like most of you put 3% in paragraph 11A, number 1. And what we have seen more frequently lately is buyer's agent commission being less than 3%. And so we're working that conversation into our buyer presentations. And so we've been working and practicing a script on how to have that conversation with a buyer and not completely run them away. I did look up some statistics though. In our MLS in the city of Plano, there are 197 active listings regardless of price point. 146 are offering 3%, 17 are offering 2.5%, 9 are offering 2%, and 1 is offering 1%.
Wow.
So I think that's kind of interesting, just in Plano. But anyway, so this is the script we wrote in our practicing. Do you just want me to read it? Did you read it?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. So we are talking about this in our buyer presentation at a certain point. So that's why I'm saying, so we have written the next step in the process is looking for your realtor, which we are working on that today. Now I want to pause for a moment and talk about something important. Typically the seller pays our commissions. However, the only way that would change is if you wanted to see a for sale by owner property and that seller chose not to pay our commission. Another instance where you may have to make up some of the commission is if the seller has a property in the MLS and is offering to pay less than 3% commission. In that case, you as the buyer would make up the difference up to the 3%. It's important that we have this conversation now versus too far down the road so that you can factor this in for your planning purposes. My question is, do you want to see all of your options on the MLS or only those where you wouldn't have to make up the difference in the event the seller was not offering a 3% commission? And we
Now,
have,
what's the judgment call you're making when you have that conversation?
well, if
Because
they're
you're
a
the buyer.
repeat and referral client, or they just send me, it's kind of, I'm not gonna probably mess with it. It's
What kind of buyer
whatever
are they?
happens.
Yeah. For some buyers, you say, you know what? If I spend time with you, I'm gonna get paid, period.
Right.
Other buyers, there's a relationship, there are other things happening. It's a referral from an important client. It's an ongoing buyer that you work with on a lot of years, like maybe an investor or something like that. Make a judgment call, but that's a great conversation to go through the process and have there. And it's not just for sale by owners, builders,
Right.
other
Yes.
kinds of situations, so.
Hey, Jessica, are you having the same conversation regardless of price range? I mean, the 400,000 buyers in the same
Yeah.
discussion as an 800,000.
Now, we have a $2.5 million buyer right now. I'm probably not gonna have a conversation with him.
Okay.
That'll be fine. But most of those listings are offering 3%.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, and then we developed 3 objection handlers. If anybody wants this, y'all can email me. I'd be happy to send it to you.
Thanks for doing that.
Sure, and then Heather, I can see she's on the call. She's used this script on, I think, 3 buyer presentations the last couple days, so I don't know if she wanted to say anything on there, but.
Heather, do you have everything to say?
Yeah, sure. So yes, I have been using this for the last 3 buyer's rep appointments. It's a brand new script, so it's kind of one of those things. I was like, I'm not sure how this is exactly going to go, but it's been very positive. All the ones that I have met with have been first-time home buyers, so might have made it just a little bit easier. They had maybe less objections than maybe an experienced buyer would have, but I mean, it's gone very well. I basically have said exactly what Jessica did and then gave them the option. Do you want to see all of the listings, no matter what the commission is, or do you want to see only the 3%? How do you want to do that? All of them have opted to see all of their listings. But what we will do is before we actually go out to view a property, or if they say, hey, you know what, I really like this particular one, at that point, I'll let them know, hey, this is a 2.5% commission or a 2% commission. So they can like take a look at that and see, hey, do I want to pay that extra, however much it is for this property? But they just have the option. So I think it's great. And the response has been really good.
Excellent.
We follow that up with an email confirming
Okay.
that that's what they wanted.
Correct.
And it kind of creates some confidence that they feel like you know what you're doing and you're good at what you do, and you stand behind the fact that it's a business and you're making business decisions, you're gonna get paid.
Wouldn't that also help create the idea that you're really helping to watch out for their bottom line?
I think so, yeah.
You
And you're
know,
letting them
you're
make the
trying to make
decision.
sure they understand what
Yeah.
they walk away with
Sure.
or
Yeah.
have to pay.
Now, and it's hard to do in a seller's market like this, but if you've got a piece of property that the seller doesn't have significant strength in negotiation and your buyer's in a good position, this property's been on the market, there's some unusual situations, your buyer, not you, but your buyer can put in special provisions that they require the seller to pay you the 3%. Even though the listing agent may be offering up 2 or 2.5,
Really?
the buyer can say, you know what, I'd like to buy your house, but your broker is not offering my agent 3%, which is what I've agreed to pay my agent. They're only getting 2%. So that extra 1%, I'd have to pay it. And if I have to pay it, I'm not buying your house. So I need for you to step up and pay your agent money to make sure my agent gets paid.
That's the best part of the shift right there, baby.
So the buyer can do that. Buyer can do.
And this whole conversation was like a light bulb moment for me in the town hall meeting when I think it was Carol and Angela Taylor, Carol Thompson.
And Lindsay.
And Lindsay were all
Yeah.
talking about, basically, I think Carol, I'm not trying to speak for her, but she had said something like she's leaving feedback on some of those that are less than a 3%, like this disqualified my buyer because you're already pricing them out. They've got to make up the difference. Sorry.
Yep.
That's why we're not writing an offer.
Good. And the market is shifting a little bit. Buyers are getting a little tired of this. And we're seeing a little extended days on market, so we're not having the leverage that they had, so.
I'm seeing some
We're
more
seeing-
price decreases
Yeah,
coming
And I
through too.
think that we'll see, as we get into the fall, I'll see some more shifting there, I think. So,
Hopefully we can slow them down. 'Cause they didn't
Yeah.
say they would.
oh, yeah, I agree. So this is good. So thank you very much, Jessica. That was very helpful. We appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Heather, for jumping in.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. And, okay, paragraph 8, which deals with intermediary. We all understand, familiar with the intermediary situation. I want to make sure that you understand as you work through the process. If a buyer says they don't want to do intermediary, it'd be pretty unusual, but if they do, they're telling you they don't want to see any of our listings. Because if they're not have an authorized intermediary and they're a client of yours, they can't see any of our listings. That'd be an intermediary situation. So that eliminates a whole, and you know, if that's their situation, that's not a good buyer. Right? What? Let me see everything else out there first. Well, no. How serious are you as a buyer in this market? Seriously, you understand that? And of course, you understand our policy is if you represent the buyer as a client, you've got to make sure that you don't end up representing the buyer and the seller in the situation unless you go through the process with our management and deal with that particular circumstance. But intermediary, buyer side is just, you know, not a challenge and not any other big decision there because they want to see everything out there. Just allow them to. Competing clients, paragraph 9. Need to remember this agreement is at the broker level. And what this paragraph says is buyer understands that other agents in our office may have buyer clients that they're showing the same property you're showing the buyer. However, you also have the challenge, and we're seeing this in this market because of the reduced inventory. You as an individual agent may have more than one buyer client who you're going to show the same property. So you've got to make a decision right then who you're going to end up with. I mean, it's okay. It's one thing to show that, but if you've got both of your buyer clients, especially owner occupied buyer clients, who want to make offers, you've got to let one of them go. You're not going to make an offer for 2 buyer clients on the same property. Yes, ma'am.
So it was our listing, but we had an agent who showed it to 2 different clients. So at that point you have a
One of
conversation.
our agents?
No,
Oh, somebody else. Okay.
yeah. So do you, at that point you have a conversation with like
No.
telling them you have to?
No. This is on the buyer side.
Right. I'm just speaking for just if you were the buyer's agent. So you
Yeah,
have.
so here's the challenge. If you have that happen, once you learn that you've got that second buyer client who won't see that same property that you already have another buyer client may have shown, you need to have the conversation and you need to decide which one are you going to keep and which one are you going to refer off to somebody else in the office or on the team.
Before you show it.
Yeah, before you do that. Now, generally, it's going to be on a seniority basis, but there are other factors involved. You know, you may have a stronger relationship with one than the other, but you need to have a conversation and they'll respect it. The only time that you can get away with 2 buyer clients on the same property is they're both investors. Owner occupied, the human nature factor kicks in and they say, you know what? You knew that was the house. Our kids' best friends live next door. We had to have this neighborhood and you knew what it took to get it and you didn't help us. No way to get past that. But investors understand the situation, say, hey, I got 2 investors, everything's confidential, but you need to know I've got another investor into the same property. And if you don't want me to represent both of you, then you go and you say whatever. But with investors, you're more likely to be able to get away with it. But still, you can have the conversation.
Like in her case, if it's our listing and we see one agent submit 2 different offers.
Yeah. I mean,
Nothing on our side.
yeah, on our side, remember, we just had the situation with Alex Agoris. He has the listing. Same buyer, 3 offers with 3 different agents.
For the same listing. That's-
Same listing. 3 buyers with 3 different companies. I mean, 3 agents, 1 buyer, 3 different companies, 3 offers. That's crazy. And the seller ended up taking one of them, understanding all the risks, and it ended up closing. And you think, no way, I mean, what kind of buyer is this? Who's using 3 agents against each other to make offers? So when we got the listing, if we find out, wow, look at that, same agent, 2 different buyers. The only thing is you're gonna have a conversation with your seller and says, okay, this is
Strange.
kind of interesting.
Atypical.
And even though everything is confidential, this agent shouldn't be telling the other buyer about this. They should have had the conversation, work through the process like we talked about here. We don't know to what degree they did. As you work through that, so, it's a little unusual, but if it otherwise is a good offer, we feel good about it. Because remember, one of the criteria on a seller deciding which offer to take is the agent on the other side. And when you look at who the buyer's agent is and you see what they're doing, seller may say, I got a lot of other good offers. I don't want to get into that mess. So maybe move on. But that's an interesting factor. But yeah, have a conversation with your seller and then make a risk-based decision and kind of move on. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a risk? So I'm just thinking, because I take all this back to our team. Is there a risk though that if one of our agents did have 2 buyers wanting to see the same property and she gives it to Chrissy on our team, there's no risk there that it's kind of still within our team?
Yeah, what you would have to do is make sure, one, you told them, 2 buyer clients on the same property. What I'm willing to do is have one of you, so we don't have any potential conflict, be represented by another person on our team. So, and you get an email acknowledgement them, they acknowledge that this other person who represents them they're all on the Kim Davis team or adjustment or whatever, they're on the same team. And they say, that's still a little bit too close. Can we get another agent in your office who's not on the team? Sure, we respect that. And then work out a referral fee. Yeah. Makes semi-good sense. We good with competing clients? We've already kind of talked about broker's fee, but you need to become paragraph 11. You need to be comfortable with the obligations in 11A, the obligations of you and the buyer in 11B, the earning payable 11C. You need to be pretty comfortable with this as you work through that and understand what's being agreed to there. Kind of have that conversation work through. Paragraph 18F talks about, and I know you're warning your buyers, it could be recorded, be under surveillance on every property we see. And something keeps happening, and that we know better. Don't let them stand out on the front porch in a house that's got ring and talk about the house. Don't do that. And if they are, get back in the car, go down to Starbucks or somewhere, and then have the conversation. But don't leave the property as you work through it. Yes, ma'am.
So we had a seller who heard a conversation over their Ring doorbell that they didn't like, and we ended up having to bring up to the other agent. And our seller was concerned she wasn't allowed to be listening and telling me this stuff, but that's not an issue, right?
Yeah, it is.
Heard on the.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It is. It is. And that's why in the listing agreement, we have a paragraph that says to the seller, any surveillance, any recording, you need legal advice. You need to talk to an attorney. Because even a ring, even like that, you're listening to on people, and there are different laws dealing with audio versus video.
So there should be advice to talk to an attorney if they're gonna.
Absolutely. If they've got a ring, if they've got anything in their property that can create any kind of surveillance, whether it's audio, visual, whatever, you need to advise them to talk to an attorney. And they really need to do it. I mean, they just, because the law is pretty harsh, and if the buyer on the other side is really pushing on the deal, penalties can be very severe. I'm really surprised. One of the things that hasn't happened that I know, I haven't heard of it, but I'm surprised because as many attorneys are out there who look for business, that we don't have some troll attorneys that are going around looking at houses and finding out they've been surveilling and decided to sue somebody. I'm just surprised that hadn't happened yet. That maybe it's happened and everybody's always settled. We never got to any kind of a court situation or a settlement. But
Yeah, that could be.
so you need to really be careful. And when we get to talk about the listing rate, you need to be very careful in dealing with that. So,
And make proper disclosure in the MLS if there are recording devices.
yes, absolutely. Make sure you've done proper disclosure, make sure that they know it, because this could be a serious issue. Although, and I've told the story, you probably remember, one of our agents had the listing and the seller was hearing what the buyers were saying. And we said, you know, I didn't know you had surveillance, where you didn't have surveillance, didn't have any of that going on. Two-story house and stairs going up, there was a little room underneath the stairs. And when it was being shown, he'd go in there and hide
Oh, my
underneath the
God.
stairs and listen to everybody.
Oh, my God.
What do you know about that?
I thought I'd heard all your stories. I haven't.
And we said, oh, wow, man, I guess there's nothing illegal about you hiding in your house and listening to everybody. You're not recording.
So
anything.
the disclosure in the
Yes.
MLS needs to be in special notes.
Put in private remarks
Right, that's what I'm.
Well,
or
but there's a
there
there's a
is a
field.
box you check.
There's a field that says,
Yeah.
are there any recording devices present, audio or video? And those are two different ones. So if you have them both, select them both.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient or do we also put it in the special remarks?
I think that would be sufficient. You know, because people are looking at that kind of stuff. Jessica, thank you for being here.
Thank you, sorry.
Good luck on your other
you.
situation.
Thank you again,
You know, she always says, I can only handle so much of Bob and I leave him out of here. I understand that. Every time I think of her and Brad, I think of golf because of their whatever. Was that not a great win
Yes.
that Ron did at the Open?
That's pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
That was just his wife, his new baby and all the things. And this is a guy who was what, 6 strokes up at a memorial and had to withdraw because he was tested positive for COVID. And yet he comes back and he will do this. That just is a really great story. So that buyer rep agreement, those are the key points you want to touch on and make sure you have a sense of it as you work through it. You following questions on that? I got you good. Now, in the, I don't have a handout for the exclusive right to sell agreement, the listing agreement. So we'll just kind of go through and touch on it. Hopefully you've got a copy of that there that you kind of work through it. Again, same thing in paragraph 1. Parties, make sure whoever is in that listing agreement may be a little bit more important in a listing than a buyer rep, because this is the person who's going to convey title. And if you've got a trust, you've got some kind of a corporate entity, something going on here, make sure that we know about that now, because we're going to make use of that and sell the property, and the title company's going to be involved, and attorneys and whoever else. So make sure you clearly identified who the seller is. We're not so concerned about the enforceability of this agreement about it, although that's important. We want to make sure that it really correlates with what's going to happen in the contract. The title company's looking at the contract and deal with the conveyance. Remember, the title company never sees this. They don't see our listing. So what they're looking to is the contract, and we need to make sure that this, what's here, flows part of that. Same thing on the broker information, paragraph 1, our company, and then put your name off to the side. And typically the email that you're going to put in here is going to be your email that we have in there. The listing agreement has been updated to look like the new contract. So in paragraph 2, we talk about controls. We talk about, in the accessory, we talk about the controls, what that includes, all the information. You'll generally have the conversation with your seller at the time you list the property about any exclusions. I mean, it's a good idea to walk with them through the house. What is it going to take with you? What do you want to do? Because many sellers say, I can't believe you think I'd leave that, whatever that is. So, well, we need to address it. We need to make sure it's there. What you have to be careful of is in the listing agreement, because paragraph 2 correlates exactly with the contract. When you put exclusions in here, they may feel like it's been taken care of, and they'll make sure, and you'll make sure that that item gets excluded. Well, you've got to make sure that what's in the contract reflects what's here. Because they'll expect that's already be taken. Hey, we excluded it. We excluded MLS, excluded here. We're good. No, now it's in the contract. It's got to be in the contract. So you got to make sure you address the deal with that. Yes,
Can I
ma'am.
back you up to broker information? We have our email address. Do we have our phone number or the?
Yeah, probably gonna have your phone.
They've got the IBS that's going to have all of the broker's information on it.
Because usually I put both here, but I was always
Yeah.
wondering
put
what
yours.
the preference
Yeah.
was.
And on the next page, we have the list price. And make sure you have a number in here. TBD is not a good thing. Because, you know, it's a work in progress. We're still working on it. We're kind of debating back and forth. Well, you gotta have a number. You can, MLS will accept a range. I don't, now, I've never felt that was effective because everybody, buyers will automatically say, well, if I got a range from 350 to 375, then 350 is what we're gonna, you know. So, but technically you can do a range in MLS, but other than that, so.
Don't do a range in the MLS.
Yeah, not a good thing. Reasonable on the listing term, and I didn't mention this on the buyer rep, but every representation agreement has to have, under the law, under the track, a definite termination date. It can never be open. It can never be conditioned on something. You have to have a definite termination date. It's required by track. Have to have that.
And just like you can amend that date with an amendment to the listing, the same thing with the price. If you're one of the people who likes to try to get the listing signed off on it, you've got all the dates maneuvered so you can just secure your place with the listing, but then do all the other stuff later. Don't leave that blank, put something in there because you can always amend the price later. So if anybody's does, you know, there are some people who just every time they go to a listing agreement or a listing appointment, they want to get the listing signed, even though they may not have everything completely worked out yet. Just like Bob said, don't leave it blank, make sure there's something in there and let them know that you can change it later easily with an amendment.
Good. Compensation. Of course, you get to decide on the total number here. You're gonna have to pay 3% VAC. We talked about that in recent class and all decision, all that kind of stuff. If you're going to do any kind of a variable, and this is going to be the seller bringing something up. Because as you have the conversations, okay, you know, 6%, because I've got to pay 3% out to the other side. So you don't want to pay the other side more than you pay your own agent, do you? Why would you do that? Why would you pay the enemy more than you pay your guy, your gal? Why would you do that? Well, of course, you know, so you're going to 6%. You said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I want you to be taken care of. What if you don't have to pay the other side? What if there's no agent on the other side? Do you still get 6%?
Yes.
Well, you might start off with, well, yeah, because it's still a lot of work. I'm getting you your money. I'm getting you. So, you know what? I'll tell you what. I work. I'll cut it down to 5. I'll give you a % break here. Now, you're not going to give up the whole 3. Because if you're dealing with an unrepresented buyer on the other side,
You're doing a lot of extra work.
you're not only doing a lot of work, you've got more liability. Huge liability when you're dealing directly with an unrepresented person on the other side of the deal. And make sure they understand that. That's why it's not going all the way down. It's just like when you've got a buyer, unrepresented buyer on your listing, and they want that 3%. I know you guys are paying 3% to buyer's agent. I have an agent, so I get the money, or we're gonna have a price reduction. No. And here's why I won't be giving up the whole 3%. Here's how that works. Because you do need to understand it. Not only is a lot of work every time they see the property, that's you, but the big factor is liability, significant liability. You work through that. So if you're going to do that, you can put that in here under 582, and it's fine. You know, here's what it is, or you can put a special provision to the listing agreement. Wait, you can go through that. And deal with it. Yes, ma'am.
So in number 2, if you were to, if you did represent both sides and you were willing to discount 5%, you would check, you would still put 6% at the top, and then you would say if you're
If there's
representing.
no VHC to the other side, listing commission is 5%.
Got it. Thank you.
As simple as that. Yeah, exactly. Third page here, paragraph E, protection period. You need to understand the protection period totally goes away if the seller lives with another realtor. The only time this ever applies is this listing expires or you allow the seller early release. Then you have to, under the terms of the protection period, you've got to send the notice and the information to the seller. Here are all the buyers, we induce the property on protection for them. But if they enter, even if it expires, if they end up listing with another realtor, protection period does not apply. Because we cannot put the seller in position of owing 2 brokers a commission. Correct, won't allow that. So you need to know in those cases, protect your does. What this is really meant to do is try to keep people honest and not just go around you and cut you out totally and say, hey, you know, this thing is going to expire in a couple of days. Won't you come back next week and we'll cut a deal without the agent? I can cut you a better deal because I know anything.
Exactly.
So keep track of those people coming to the open houses. Because watch that buyer who keeps going back into the kitchen and talking to the seller. They keep kind of glad handing each other. Oh, yeah, hey, I see you next week. Okay. Work through that. So make sure you understand how that works. Make sure in the listing services situation, this is where we get into, if you've got it into the internal marketing situation, the private internal marketing, and they choose, so then I put an MLS and like that. Make sure they understand that means no public marketing of the property, nothing that can expose you, because once it's public marketing, we have one business day to get an MLS. And it doesn't matter who does it, doesn't matter if you've got it going in the internal and then they're visiting with some of their friends at soccer game. Oh, by the way, did you know we got our house on the market worth? Oh, really? Didn't know. Public marketing. And, you know, and agents are filing complaints under this against other agents. And the fines start at $1,000. So you want to make sure the seller understands that that's the deal. And we warn them that in the listing services and make sure they understand. We've got that on page 4 there. We talked about, hey, and they have one business day, got to go on MLS. Work through that. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay. There on page 5, cooperation with other brokers. This is just where you put in there, you're going to pay 3% to the BAC. If it's not an MLS broker, you can put, say, well, if it's not an MLS broker, I don't know them anything technically, and they don't have a super key card. And so, you know, it's this guy coming up in San Antonio that wants to do deals here and doesn't have to join our board as a buyer. I'm not going to pay him 3%. So you could put some different number in here, but you need to recognize no one sees this but you and yourself. So the other side can say, well, you know, you have to pay me 3%. I know what you got in your list agreement. You got 3% to non-MLS, so you got to pay. No, they don't even see this. What do you typically put in the non-MLS? Do you? Zero. To say, hey, if you're not part of, because we don't know them anything. If they're not a member of our MLS, or we have an MLS, it doesn't apply to them. Now, you're going to have to look at what's going on with your property. If you've got a piece of property that you've got a little bit of a challenge in getting it sold for whatever reason, you're happy to work with anybody. You can be with Oklahoma. Well, maybe not that bad. Same thing on the intermediary situation. If they do not authorize intermediary, you see that on page 6. That means that the broker will not show their property. Prospective buyers, that means none of our agents can show that listing if they don't authorize intermediary.
And when I've explained it that way, that easily, that simply,
Yes.
I've never, ever had pushback on this.
How would you even police it?
Do what?
How would you?
What you have to do in MLS, wait, good question, good point, if you're going this rate. If you have a seller who hadn't authorized intermediary, when you put it in MLS, prior remarks, you've got to say, no Keller Williams Plano agent can show this property. All of our agents have to know they can't show this property to a client. And do it. Nobody would do that. It's no, Nick wouldn't do it.
I've never had a pushback on
Yeah,
intermediary.
you wouldn't. Oh, by the way, confidential information is also in the buyer rep. That confidentiality lasts forever. So you've got a listing, it expires, it goes away, and then another broker has it next week, and you end up with a buyer client on that property. There may be some things you know about that seller that are confidential that you cannot give that information to your new buyer client. You need to let your buyer client know that confidentiality, by the way, applies to you. Everything confidential you give me stays forever, and it does. The courts say you can't forget what you know, which we disprove every time we lose our keys or we forget that all the time.
So that actually happened to me. I had a listing, it was quite a while ago, 10 plus years ago. Listing expired. I knew plenty about the seller. through one of the open houses, somebody who was interested, but then dropped off for a month or two, circled back around, called me directly about the house. So I'm no longer the listing agent on that house. He goes, great, why don't you take me over there? Oh, okay, but I had to explain to him what I could not say. And he still wanted me to represent him, so I did get the deal out of that. But it was, and it went smoothly, it went fine, but I had to sit there and think about, all right, what can I actually tell this guy and what can't I tell him? So it became a thought exercise, whether or not I wanted him as a client.
Yeah, because it begs the question what his motivation was for wanting to have specifically you.
He thought I'd know more about the property.
And the property information is not confidential.
Yeah, which I didn't, I made the point of saying, well, what I know, most anybody could know. He goes, I still want you.
Deal.
Because I'm charming.
That's it.
You know why he really works with Nick? Remember what I talked about in my hierarchy, and I just did this in a orientation CCR yesterday. In the hierarchy of risk management, the most effective risk management tool is to be likable. And that's an absolute, that's not a joke. It's not a, oh, yeah, sure. No, if people like you, they don't sue you. If people like you, they will list with you. People like you, they want you to work in this buyer. That's the key. And while he had good information and the reason he knew about him was the house like that, reality is you liked it. I mean, there's a likability factor that's huge. He just, people work with people they like.
Well, and I think
Trust and all
people
those kinds of things.
also respect your disclosure right up front that I
Oh,
can't.
yeah, here's what I can and can't do.
Knowing
Not
the,
everybody would have told him that.
knowing the rules and being able to go through that, like I've told people before, just going through the buyer representation agreement or the listing agreement is my presentation a lot of the time. Because once you show your knowledge, that's your value proposition. And then you show that you can care about people and you're likable. I mean, that's really all you have to do.
Yep.
So that doesn't apply to property details, that just implies like, and if they had asked about the seller's current financial
Right.
situation.
Why
that's what you-
are they selling? How much
Would
would they owe?
accept less?
Yes. Would they accept less? Do they, gosh.
The big thing is why they're selling.
Yeah, that's the biggest one. And he,
Is it a divorce? Is it an illness? Is it all those things?
Yep. And so,
Anything is in confidential, anything that the world doesn't know.
yeah, if it's public information out there, readily findable by anybody, the general public, then you can share that. That's okay.
So on page 7, we talked about some seller representations. These are things that the seller represents, and 12A, people don't think about that a lot, but we have wholesalers out there. We have, investors who are in a contract with a motivated seller and they're going to sell that contract or sign it. I've got one right now where one of our agents in Rockwall said, well, it's a good deal and he's in a contract, it's a good piece of property. And he wants me to help him find a buyer for it. He wants me to list it, put it in MLS. No. 12A, seller has fee simple title. That investor doesn't have fee simple title. He's got an equitable interest. He doesn't have fee simple title. You can't put it in MLS. And your listing agreement would have to be changed. And you're not going to change a pre-printed text without a conversation with me or Mike or Joe. You're not going to do that. So that fee simple title is kind of important. It's kind of a big deal. Now in 12E, this is where forbearance comes in. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's excellent.
12E is where I think forbearance comes into play. And we talked about that in our June 3rd class, which unfortunately was just live only, but sellers who took forbearance this last year, depending on what happened with their lender, what their lender did, and depending on whether it was FHA, VA, or conventional, the entity that handles FHA and VA, I'm trying to remember the name of it, it's a strange name. They're very hard to deal with. It's a very time-consuming situation. If normally when the title company calls to get the payoff information on the seller, situational conventional, they get it pretty close to right away or pretty close, depending on who the lender is. But on forbearance, you're looking at 30 days. And in some cases, the title company said, you're lucky, depending on, because if it's an FHA or VA, the timeline. So if you've got a situation here with that type of financing and the seller needs to get into a quick closing deal like that, quick cash buyer going to deal the deal, you only get your payoff information. So that type of thing, you need to have that conversation with the seller, see where they are with their lender and what they did in dealing forbearance. If it was added on to the end, if it was something that you're going to deal with now, it's going to pay out the proceeds of the sale. How does that really affect them from their payout? Be able to work through and kind of deal with that. Under the additional back towards the top of page 7, back in paragraph 11, number 7 there, where you, I'm sorry, not number 7, number 3, furnish comparative marketing and sales information about other properties prospective buyers. You represent the seller, you've got a CMA, track requires you to do a CMA if you represent a seller. So you've got a CMA there, and here's a buyer, not with an agent, but here's a buyer that needs a CMA, or would like you to CMA to them. Seller gives you permission to do that right now, right here. Now, if you ended up taking the listing at a number much higher than your CMA doesn't support it. You don't want to be giving up that CMA without a second conversation with your seller. If you give that, if you've got your CMA says you top out at 350, if you're lucky at 350, and you listed it at 400,000. Buyer says, well, your CMA says 350. Why would I pay more than 350? So don't be giving that information up if your CMA doesn't support the list price. They should work through that and deal with it. Give that. A lot of the rest of this stuff is a kind of a boilerplate kind of thing. Liability, occasionally we'll have a seller, almost all the time it's an attorney or someone like that who wants to change some of the pre-printed text. You always have to run it by management before you allow that. And a lot of them will do it in the limit of liability situation. And particularly in 14C where they like to get rid of the indemnification. We won't do that. We'll work with them on a lot of things, but we're not giving up our liability because there are protections in here for things that are not our fault, things we didn't do. Maybe someone who showed the property, maybe it was something the seller, their guest did. They need to not hold us liable. We've got protections in paragraph 14 that helps us with that as you kind of work through. You do have in paragraph, I guess it's on page 10 now, where you talk about the foreign seller and we also give them the advice about getting legal advice. If we're going to do any surveillance, like at him and they're on page 10. And we tell them that's the case, but we get them to check off the correct box and I to make sure whether they're a foreign person or not, and have that conversation of what it is. Going through that.
Does everybody know there are 2 boxes in IFL?
They say they are not. Is not. And we wouldn't do this because we're better than that. We're smarter than that. But the number of agents out there, we just had this. And our agent seller's name was, I want to say it was Yen. Y-E-N. And the buyer said, well, that's clearly a foreign person. Name like Yen, that's a foreigner. So we need to make sure right now that we know that so we don't have a big surprise at closing. Well, he wasn't a foreign person. He was from here, his parents from here, his grandparents from here. I mean, just 5 generations back. His name was, but the buyer said, oh yeah, a name like that. And then you gotta be a foreign person. Just go down that road. Now, contract, residential condominium contract.
Okay.
You want to talk about that? We want to talk about that?
You can talk about that. I'll chime in.
Yeah. Here's our challenge with condos. And we go through site, we're not as big on those here as they are down more in Dallas, where they've got more of the and then Addison, places like that, we have more of them. Any of y'all have done any condos at all? Okay, couple of key points I want you to be clear. First of all, make sure it really is a condo. A lot of agents out there use condo as a marketing term. Sometimes they'll say townhouse and it's actually a condo, or they say condo and it's actually townhouse. So make sure it really is. Notice in paragraph 2, in 2A, legal script, we don't have a lot in a block in the subdivision. We've got unit, building, project, condominium project, different way of describing it to make sure that's what that is as you work through it. Might get better. Everybody's leaving. I really thought we were on a roll here.
Now you hurt
Thank you.
his feelings.
So want to make sure it truly is condominium. Now, a big thing to understand in a regular 1 to 4 family home, thank you for being here, when you were here. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. In a regular 1 to 4 family home contract, if it's in a mandatory HOA, we have the mandatory HOA addendum. We don't use that addendum with the condominium. In fact, on the mandatory HOA addendum itself, it says up at the top, not for use with condominiums. Because all condominiums have an owners association, no exceptions. So it's covered in the contract. Now, the distinction you need to know in paragraph 2, where it talks about both the docs and the resale certificate. And you have in your checkoff where you have it or don't have it. If the buyer is going to terminate based on the receipt of that information, it's a different way of termination. It's a different timeline than you have in a mandatory HOA addendum. Before the 6th day, and the manner of termination is hand delivered or certified mail return receipt requested. You cannot email it to them like you can on a normal 1 to 4 family. So these are very specific differences. And the reason they're different is a condominium ownership is a different form of ownership in the property code. And this reflects on the language that's in the property code. So if your buyer's going to terminate under this provision, and not something else, they've got to do it in a very specific way. If they wait 6 or 7 days, they just lost the right. If they send an email, they haven't terminated. Samuel, looks like you had a question.
I think I zoned out when you said the important part about how they go about terminating.
Yeah, either hand delivered
and delivery. Okay.
or certified mail return receipt requested.
I'll be back.
Gotta do
But
one
you
of those.
use the termination, it just has to be.
But you can do that. You can use termination, the correct termination form, but you cannot email it like you can under the 1 to 4 family contract. And do it that way. So you gotta do it in that very, very specific ways you deal with it. The other things you'll notice, big things in a condo contract, there's no survey. So you don't have a paragraph 6C with surveys in there if you work through that. Most of the other things, just kind of, we'll jump down and see. Most of the other things are pretty much like the regular 1 to 4 family. It just addresses the difference in the type of property and the form of ownership as you kind of work through that. But, yes, sir.
Just having to do with the dates on this, just again, best practices, just like in this market, because HOA docs likely won't expire in this market if you've got a property that's going to sell quickly enough. Try to get, there's a form that goes with this with a listing. So the listing agreement for a condo is different.
Yeah, there's
Know
no
that?
that you use with the listing.
Yeah, so, and on that, it asks them, the seller, to supply within a certain amount of days, the stuff basically here, you would then be able to pass on to the buyer. And it says which parking spots they own and things like that. So when you're doing your due diligence ahead of time, taking a condo listing, make sure you have that addendum as part of your discussion point to know that, to prep them so that they'll know what they need to do in order to allow you to list the property properly. So.
Absolutely. And so, make sure the big distinction between whether it's a condominium or some other kind of property is who owns the land. And sometimes you have townhouse projects that are row houses. You say, well, that must be a condo because, they're no. The guy owns the land and he's got a party wall agreement with his next door neighbor. But he owns the land, that's a townhouse, not a condominium. So, and so.
I've definitely been fooled on that. There's a right off of Hill Hillcrest or Coit, Helsum. Anybody down that way just beside 635? There's a couple of streets there and it's A, B, C as on Helsum. They look like townhomes. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why they had what they had on the tax records, and come to find out they were actually a condo project. Also, there's an over 55 community by Hills of Prestonwood. I can't remember the name of it. And it's
Is it condominium?
Yep, and those are condos. They're four together.
Right
They,
there on the corner.
It's,
Yep.
I can't think of what it's called.
yep, I'm blanking on the name, but don't assume just because I, coming into this for so many years, I always thought, okay, if it's if it's on the dirt, if where they live is on the dirt, that's a townhome. That's not always the case. And, you know, if it's a box in the sky, it's a condo. If you own the dirt, it's a townhome. Make sure you look into that ahead of time because your chances are, and I've seen names of subdivisions that have condo in it. It's a townhome. So don't.
But would the quick way to clearly identify would be the way that it's listed in the tax rolls?
Yeah,
Because it would have the lot and block.
sure.
and-
Well, on the tax rolls, they might have a legal descriptions that's a little confusing because that's the whole land that the condo sits
Yeah.
on. So you likely won't have lot block, but you might have some form of legal description that's a little bit different, which should make you curious.
Okay, yeah.
And generally what you'll do is you'll call the title company you do a lot of business with and say, hey, we're in this area, what is it? Condo, townhome, what is it? Kind of get that. Because, you know, many of the listing agents will list it incorrectly in MLS and they'll call it one townhome, it's actually a condo.
Yep.
Because they use marketing terms to work through it. And you don't want to find yourself, and we've had this, I mean, we've had an agent, we were in executed contract, we were maybe like, we can have 2 weeks before closing. And all of a sudden they discovered that they'd used a 1 to 4 family contract on a condominium. What do? You do it. Yeah, the parties had to agree to amend the contract.
Hope the parties are still happy with their contract.
Yeah.
And they'll sign it.
No kidding.
Because it's useless. I mean, it's.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You just sold something that you haven't.
And the risk to us, and because I look at the risk to us,
Yeah.
is if it ends up at Trent say, agent, you're negligent, both agents, both sides, negligent for allowing the client to use the wrong contract form. Because that's one of our obligations under the rules of Trent, is to use the right form to work through it, so. Hey, Zoom folks, y'all guys have been really quiet. You have something? Have anything?
Bob,
Yes.
on that 6% going back to the listing agreement, Nick mentioned an unrepresented buyer. How can an unrepresented buyer make an offer or see a house in MLS?
Well, there's a public section of MLS, or they use one of their realtor friends, really good friend who they're not going to use to buy a house, who gets the information for them. So they get that. Now, remember, the TREC contracts are public documents. Anyone can use them. So they can go to the TREC website and pull down the contract forms, write an offer and send it to you. And that's typically what could happen with a buyer customer. Most of the time, frankly, they've got an agent person helping them. Maybe it's an agent in another town or whatever. It helps them get into the deal and find the information. But it's not a good enough friend that's going to actually help them make money. So
Okay.
that's typically what will happen.
You knew I'd have to come up with at least one question.
I know
Bob.
you did, James. I appreciate you doing that. Good job.
You stay on brand.
So guys, you guys have any more? Went through a lot of good stuff here. Y'all had some good questions. And hopefully this was very helpful, and hopefully the co-instructor thing worked out well for you.
Yes.
Because we like to work to get some more exposure to all you for different. And the big advantage with Nick is he's actually in the trenches like you guys are.
Well,
Doing this stuff
and he
daily.
seems somewhat familiar with what he's.
We
doing.
read one of them.
Oh, he
He
didn't.
read the contract once.
You
It was
guys-
a long time ago, but he did read one. He remembers some of the stuff. in it.
Some of it. I had to cram right before this, like you would.
Well, he stayed at a Holiday Inn Express.
Oh, yeah, that's good enough. You have anything else? I don't have anything else. You guys have any more?
Oh, There
Yes,
was,
sir.
there was one thing, the leases, did we? talk
Oh, yeah.
about that? Just
Yeah.
briefly, this came from the transaction department as something that's come up more recently. If you look at the 1 to 4 family contract, this isn't it. But I think we have it.
Let's have leases up there.
Well, anyway, So if you're entering into a contract where you're making an offer, you've got a buyer and you're incorporating the seller's temporary residential lease. So the seller's going to stay after the end of possession. That is not what this paragraph is for. Paragraph 4 in the contract that talks about residential leases, it's not to be used in that scenario. That's, of course, a separate addendum. But if people say, oh, well, but there's going to be a lease because it's a temporary lease. No, this is for existing leases that are on the property right now, meaning it's an investor who's leasing the property to somebody else. That's, and it does not end before, well, you have to do it anyway. Even if it ends before the close date, you need to be made aware of that.
And it's, and exactly right, it's between the owner and someone else.
Right.
Seller temporary residential lease is between the parties to the contract. Yep. So you wouldn't check all that box. Good reminder.
And for a seller's temporary lease or a buyer's temporary lease, you need to make sure and have that conversation about insurance and.
Yes, got to have that insurance agent conversation. Barry, you had something?
Off subject, but the guy that's giving his girlfriend the 1.7 billion
Yeah,
cash,
yeah,
the property's not in his name.
no.
What happens at the title company? How do they verify that the funds are?
Oh, funds are already at the title company. They've been wired. Title company has the money.
Wow.
And they don't have to
1.7
verify-
million in cash.
They don't have to verify the source of those funds.
No,
Cash.
cash. So when they get the money, remember, anyone can buy anything, any private real estate in the United States, anyone.
So what happens when his wife finds out?
What if he breaks up with him the next day? Oh, really? He's covered.
You know, I'm just here going, this guy, you know, she must be a real cutie. 1.7 million.
Well, this guy has.
This
money.
nice house for you and your son. She's single, you know. In your name, you know, I said, maybe otherwise there wasn't a prenup agreement. This was in lieu of, I don't know.
So title companies don't care about the source.
No,
Lenders do.
it's wired. It's wired. If money is wired, here's the only requirement for title company. It needs to be good funds as defined by the title company by TDI. As long as it's good funds, they say, yeah, these are good funds. So we can, because they're now obligated to take those good funds and disperse money to the seller and pay commissions and all those things. So as long as it's good funds, they don't care where it came from. I mean, it could even, you know, well, maybe not even Oklahoma, but it could come from almost anywhere. Sam?
I think I missed the beginning of that scenario. So in that scenario, the problem was that the guy was married.
No.
That's just a joke.
Just threw that out.
He's trying to compete with Bob for who's funniest.
That would be an interesting factor to get thrown into it.
That's how the rumor started.
That's how rumors get started.
What was the scenario?
But you know, that kind of thing is, go ahead.
Just the scenario was, there was a buyer representation agreement with the girlfriend, but the boyfriend was actually the one coming up with $1.7 million cash, and therefore there wasn't true representation of the person who's paying for the property,
Yeah.
written representation.
So what happens in the situation of private investors who are providing, like an investor with the money?
So it all depends on whether or not there's going to be a lien against the property. When it becomes financing, and addressed in paragraph 3 or third-party financing.
For example, what the investor that one of our buyers agent always works with, the one that we're in contract with now, it's a cash deal and the money is being provided by a private investor.
Okay, which means she's not taking a lien on the property.
It doesn't matter.
And so we don't care about the source of funds.
Got it.
The buyer cares because, and this is one of the concerns of moving towards this closing, is the buyer is concerned to make sure the money is going to be there, or she be in default. And so the investor being involved, if this other investor with the private funds doesn't come up with money, they're in default because they don't have any contingency on the financing. Cash deal, so no contingency. But you know, the whole joke with the boyfriend girl, we had a situation listing and single woman, we thought, and title company is doing the search on the parties stuff like that. And turns out that seller, the woman seller, is married. So our agent, and didn't hang about, our agent called her up, says, Tom, can we go with this information? And it appears that you got a husband. And she, he said, literally, guys are accused of this all. She went, forgot. Turns out they've been separated for 9 years. Just never got a divorce. He lived in another state. Now, fortunately, okay, fine, what I need to sign? He was okay with it. But it could have been a real problem because she had a husband who had some interest in the property. And I forgot. Well, yeah, it happens all the time.
My wife would like to forget this.
Yeah, the joke that my late father, and mother said, he said, I keep looking for the expiration date on the marriage license. I know there's one there somewhere. Well, thank you guys very much.
1.7 million turns out to be illegal money.
We don't care.
No,
We don't
the
care.
seller has no risk in that.
I'm not saying that. That's a legal issue. Because if it turns out the government starts going after everybody who touched that money,
Right, that's what I
I
mean.
think it could be a problem. Now, it could also be a problem for the agents.
So could the seller get out of the contract if they don't want to accept 1.7
No,
million
no,
provided by somebody else?
no. Because we don't address the source of it in there.
Good fun.
Good funds. That's good.
We think.
We can rely on that. I'll give it to you.
At 1.7.
It's hard to get a seller to turn it down, guys.
Thank you guys very much for being here. Thank you, Zoom folks. Thank you very much, Zoomers.
Thanks. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know how to turn all that off?
I know how to hit X.
Oh my God, I didn't even recognize you're here. Okay, so going back to my surveillance situation I brought up that I apparently already handled wrong, but it's already done and over with.
Let me turn off the recording. It's already.
Yeah, I'm learning. Okay, so
Here comes the help here, Nick.
I'm on
Stop
one list.
video.
I had an buyers, and the agent and a vendor irrigation guy were at our